The hungry world cannot be fed until and unless the growth of its resources and the growth of its population come into balance. This was said by Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States. Overpopulation has been discussed by humans for hundreds of years. It's such a hot topic that Hollywood has even given us several movies, like Soylent Green and Elysium, depicting the horrors of overpopulation. Currently, the world's population is at an all-time high. Earl Ellis of Cornell University states that the world's population is around 7.2 billion people. He also estimates that we're going to be around 9 billion people come 2050. So is Hollywood giving us a glimpse of what our futures might be? Or is overpopulation just another obstacle that we can overcome? In my research, I found that world governments, as well as American families and scientists, all have different takes regarding the subject of overpopulation. All civilizations around the world have one thing in common. That's some sort of government. And each of these governments have a different stance on what to do when it comes to overpopulation. Aileen Clark wrote an article for National Geographic that was titled, "How the One-Child Policy Changed China." In the 1950s, the Chinese decided that they wanted to increase their workforce. They decided to ban birth control, and they released a lot of propaganda to encourage families to start building bigger families. As a result of this, the population exploded. And it turns out they didn't have enough food to feed all these people, so actually 50,000 people died of starvation. So the government decided to take action in 1979, and they actually enacted a one-child policy. This prevented families from having more than one child, and if you tried to, they could actually force you to have an abortion, fine you heavily, and they can actually force you to become sterilized. If you take a look at the graph that I have on the projector, you can see that the graph here shows the 3 most populous countries in the world. The graph goes from the 1950s to a speculative 2050, and the graph is ranged in the millions. At the bottom in yellow, we have the United States of America. The population is relatively large, but it's relatively steady. The next largest country is actually India, who comes in second place, and their population is steadily increasing. The third largest country in the world is actually China, but it's speculated that at one point, India is going to surpass them around 2030 because the Chinese population is going to decline. So the Chinese government figured out that by 2050, a quarter of their population is going to be over the age of 65. That means that they don't have enough working class to actually afford to take care of the people that aren't working. In 2016, they decided they're going to stop the one-child policy. They decided to change it from one child to actually a two-child policy. But they might actually be too late. Surveys show that 12% of families in China is the only amount of people that actually want to have more than one child. So a large portion of the population don't want more than one child. Overpopulation is not necessarily an issue in China. The issue is that they're not having the 2.1 children on average per family to help sustain their population. A common theme that we're seeing across a lot of countries across the world is that a lot of families are deciding not to have more than one child. There was an article written by Brandy Zardonzi for the Daily Beast that was titled, "America's One-Child Policy." She's basically explaining that most average American families can't afford to have more than one child. In 1970, around 1/3 of families decided that one child was enough, but currently, as of 2013, that number has risen to about 43%. There was a general survey that was done across the United States that showed that only about 3% of Americans think that one child is the ideal number to have. So of those 43% that aren't having more than one child, a lot of them want to have more, but they simply can't afford it. There's a CNN article written by Ann Hovell called "Overpopulation Could Be a People Planet Problem." In this article, she talks about the fact that there are developing countries all across the planet that families are deciding to have one child or less. This is very evident in the country of Italy, where their population is actually increasing in age because they aren't having as many children. Zardoni states that the main culprit to this is childcare. Childcare is so expensive. She found that the cheapest she found in the United States is in Mississippi at an average of $4,600 per child per year, but it can go all the way up to $15,000 per child per year in Massachusetts. Could you imagine having 2 children and having to pay $30,000 just for childcare? A lot of families can't afford it. And actually, what they're having to do is either mom or dad are having to stay at home and give up their career aspirations, or they have to pick up an additional job to help pay for that childcare. So, as you can see, it's not really an overpopulation issue if there aren't that many families that are deciding to have, that many children. But before anybody gets upset, I have some good news for you. There are some scientists that believe that overpopulation is not the issue at all, and I really agree with that. There is an article written for the New York Times by Earl Ellis in 2013 that was called "Overpopulation is Not the Problem." Ellis is a professor of environmental studies at Cornell University, and he has a PhD in the subject. Earl states that in ancient times, we had to do what we had to do to adapt to find food. Hunter-gatherers had to learn how to do agriculture in order to create more food for a growing population. We've always found ways to transform our ecosystems to adapt to our needs. We never would have made it this far at 7.2 billion people without being able to do that. But let's take a look back at the Lyndon B. Johnson quote. "A hungry world cannot be fed until the growth of its resources, as well as the growth of its people, come into balance." Ellis agrees with this, but he doesn't think that we need to lower down the population. He believes we need to invest in technology and agriculture, as well as water and recycling, to boost the amount of resources that we have, and also decrease war and poverty, and provide more land for nature. I think this is the best solution to the issue of overpopulation. Hollywood's done a very good job at telling us that overpopulation is going to be the end of us. Sure, overpopulation has its down points, but I don't think that means the end for humankind. Governments like the Chinese have tried to prevent overpopulation from happening, but in turn they just cause more problems in the end. And it turns out a lot of families across the planet are actually having problems just affording one child as it is. Ultimately, I think that history shows us that we can overcome these issues. If we use our intelligence, we can make good investments in new technology for agriculture, water purification, as well as recycling to help provide the resources that we need to keep continuing on as a species.